Hello everyone, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here to bring you another 1980s and 90s G.I. Joe tour review. And today I'll be taking a look at the G.I. Joe team's Jungle Assault Specialist, the 1990 Pathfinder. Pathfinder made no comic book appearances in the old Nova comic run, but he makes his first cartoon appearance in the 1990 Geek Animated Season 1 episode titled United We Stand. Before I get to the figure, I'd like to point out some interesting trivia about the file card. You'll notice that Pathfinder's serial number actually has a couple of letters in there. But during my stretcher review, you'll also notice that he has the exact same serial number. And on that review, I noticed that usually the letters kind of correspond to either the figure's name or specialty or whatnot. So the JA was probably meant for Pathfinder and not Stretcher. Taking a look at Pathfinder's accessories first, he comes with what is probably one of the most unique accessories for any G.I. Joe, what the contents list on the card calls a weed eater with blade. Just to detach it from the figure's hands here. As you can see, the back of the quote-unquote weed eater had a little peg there, which was attached to a 3-inch standard G.I. Joe wire, which was then attached to the backpack, which I'll take a look at later. You notice that the weed eater, and I use that term loosely, does not have an angle. So in a lot of ways, this is not a weed eater. It's not meant, or at least it's not meant to be pointed downward towards the ground. It's more like a pole saw, I would say, which to me makes a little bit more sense for the figure, because if he's supposed to be cutting through jungle foliage, you're not likely to want to really cut the stuff by your feet or shins. It's more the stuff that's waist or chest level, which is more of the problem in a densely forested jungle. So having a pole saw is actually a better idea than something that's actually angled towards the ground. You see, there's a really nice, not only a grip, and not only an arm support, but there's also a shield for the hand. That's really nice. It's not really that necessary because the blade isn't really that close to the handle, but it's nice that that's there. And the blade itself is a real rotating piece. You can actually take it off. It was a separate piece when this thing was sealed on the card, so a kid who opened this up would have to attach it themselves. But it's really easy, just sort of pop it right back in there. Next, he has a pair of machine guns. I'm actually going to leave that on the figure just for now, just to explain the articulation of these things. They're actually attached directly to his waist, so they have up and down motion. But because this thing has a ball on the end of it, it actually has a tiny bit of in and out motion as well, which is very interesting. The other reason why I want to keep this on is to show you that it's actually kind of awkward for the figure to actually hold on to the outward-facing handles. I'm not quite sure why they're so far forward and in this angle. They should actually be a little bit backwards and upwards, but, well, whatever. I mean, if you rotate them a little bit upwards, you get more of a better angle for it to look like he's actually holding on to these things. But unfortunately, if you want it out straight, his hands don't quite meet the handles. That's rather unfortunate. So these things are just pegged onto him, and the pegs are permanently on his waist here. They're actually quite thick, with a ball on the end of it, as I mentioned before. They're actually attached via a really nice ammo belt to the backpack. It's really nice that not only are the bullet tips exposed, but you can even see the difference between the bullet tips and the casing. Of course, you get two of these bullet belts attached to both of the machine guns. The machine guns are not quite as detailed as what we got with some previous figures, like let's say the 1988 Repeater. I'm not sure if these are even based on any real machine gun, but they certainly don't look any more fanciful than what was with Repeater. And of course, both the ammo belt and the hose for the Weed Eater were attached to his backpack. In case you were wondering, yes, Pathfinder can absolutely hold on to his machine guns without them having to be permanently attached to his waist. Here I have the more traditional rifle grip here, so he can hold it a little bit closer to his eyes. And the ammo belt actually has enough length for it to stretch and still look quite nice. Of course, I have it on the other side here, so you can hold it with the grip in the upward position, and you can absolutely hold it a little bit closer to his hip. Okay, so take away his accessories, and what are you really left with? To me, you're left with a figure which doesn't look like a military figure. Now, granted, he has a boonie hat and camouflage pants, but the rest, just the rest of him kind of makes me feel like he's a hunting sportsman, or a fisherman, or something like that. I mean, the Weed Eater makes him look like a gardener, for crying out loud. He's still a really nice looking figure. I really do like the boonie cap, although it is kind of strange that he has this one side flipped up. And I know that Recondo, another jungle trooper, had that, but I'll get to that in just a moment. And one thing which is kind of a bit strange is the choice of green for the camo on his pants. You'll notice that they already had a dark forest green for his hat and part of his belt, but for the camo they went with a mint green, which, while is eye-popping and still, it still does look like camo. Honestly, I kind of wish they had gone with a darker green with that. But still, one thing that a lot of people tend to think of as really strange is his vest. It almost looks like just like a leather vest for, again, like fishing or just hunting or something like that. However, looking beyond that, which is what I generally tend to do, is look at how dark the figure is. He's very dark and subdued despite the, really bright camouflage. But he's wearing like a black t-shirt, kind of the way the 1985 Flint did, and his pants are actually black, with the camo being a lighter color on top of that. Now, normally you would have the pants as a lighter color with dark camo on top of that. So, in a sense, this is the sort of camouflage not for a leaf pattern, but actually the reverse, a sort of a negative pattern. So he's operating in the jungle, in the darkness of the jungle. That's really what this color scheme, when you look at it as a whole, tends to speak to me as. It's rather unfortunate that he has sunglasses on top of that, because that sort of negates the argument, but still, it's a really nice figure. On the artwork, you can actually see that he had some type of studs and like plates on his hat. So I guess at one point his head would have been like, his hat, well, boonie hat would have been armored. Actually, I'm kind of glad they didn't go with that, but the fact is that I kind of wish they went with the whole all-around brim being down, like it is on the artwork. Like I said, I really do like this figure, whether he has his accessories on him or not. But as you can see, this is actually how I display the figure, with one of those machine guns off, because honestly, he only needs one machine gun for one of his hands. The other one is kind of occupied with the Weed Eater, which I know a lot of people really don't like, and if they're going to put another accessory in its place, they just put the other machine gun and leave the Weed Eater alone. And if you want to have that on there, you just pull that thing all the way back up there for some storage. But now let's take a look at some previous jungle troopers. Of course, the first and most famous one is 1983 Gung Ho, who everyone just thinks of as the G.I. Joe Marine, but really he was a jungle recondo as his primary military specialty. And of course we have the 1984 Recondo, which I've mentioned quite a number of times now, and I'll just get to that in a moment. But you can actually kind of see just how different each and every one of these jungle troopers actually is. Of course, I could bring in the 1988 Muskrat, who, while he was a swamp fighter, there's also an element to forestry and jungle Recondo in that, as well as basically any of the 1988 Tiger Force figures. They would also make a good comparison here, particularly with the dark and light of Pathfinder's outfit. But they do share some things between them, despite looking very different. They all have camo pants with camo nowhere else on their bodies. And let's just take the Recondo's hat out of the equation here, because this is not a boonie hat. This is an Australian slouch hat. Now, as you can see, one side of the brim is flipped up, specifically the left side, because that's the direction in which kangaroos attack human beings. Well, actually, they go in an anti-clockwise motion, but that basically just means that they attack from the left side. So you always have that left side of the hat up, so that your ears are particularly clear, so that you can hear them approaching. Here with Pathfinder, that's actually the right side, and the brim of a true boonie hat is never so long that it covers your ears. So again, I'm not really sure why one side is up, unless of course you have a microphone or something, which he really does not have. Now, just who would Pathfinder's opposite number on the Cobra side be? Well, the file cards already mentioned Night Vipers, and you're probably wondering, well, why? But I've already mentioned just how dark Pathfinder's outfit is overall, so I'm thinking that a Night Viper in a very dark canopied jungle, canopied being, there's a lot of roofs to the trees blotting out the sun, so it can be very, very dark in forests and jungles. So that's a perfect environment for Night Vipers, and particularly why Night Vipers might have green on them. They could be jungle troopers. And of course, the whole thing with Pathfinder being a jungle trooper, but only being armed with machine guns, and twin machine guns at that, gives me a whole Predator feel about this whole thing. And these guys being somewhat invisible to thermal imaging also gives me a kind of a Predator vibe too. It's rather unfortunate that he doesn't come with a machete or something like that, but I guess that's what the Weed Eater is supposed to represent. Of course, we can't leave out Range Vipers, the 1990 Wilderness Cobra Troopers. I'm not quite sure why they're not mentioned on the file card, because I would think that they would be, quite frankly, the opposite number to Pathfinder here. Of course, they also have that rather grim-looking mask, just like the Predator alien. If you're looking for a Pathfinder on the aftermarket, he's actually fairly easy to find, complete with all of his stuff, despite the fact that the stuff is actually very small and comes apart very easily, like shown here. But it's actually fairly sturdy as well, which goes in its favor. The figure, too, is also fairly sturdy, which is very surprising because you would think that the pegs on the side would be easily broken, but generally speaking, they're not. Hasbro seemed to have learned their lesson from guys like the 1990 Metalhead, whose pegs were integral to the figure, but they cracked off like crazy. But here, they're fairly sturdy stuff, so a fairly easy time to find this figure. He's not the cheapest figure to find, but he's more like in the average range of prices that you would pay for a figure in the 1990 year. what the file card calls specifically jungle troopers with their, I guess, thermal. Kinda doesn't look like a military figure. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind the scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.